Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
And here we are again with Torah Temimah. I hope you're enjoying this, whether you're here on Zoom with me or whether you're just watching. I hope you're finding this interesting and that level of in-depth that he takes things. I mean, I think it's very cool. So anyway, and at times, of course, it's challenging reading what Chazal, which our sages of blessed memory, have to say. Sometimes it's challenges our current sensibilities. But I think it's important to deal with these things and not just to pretend they don't exist, and to see if there are ways in which to work them out in a way that can speak to us in a modern context. At any rate, we are talking here about God taking Adam's Selah and creating a woman for him. So this one is going to be, okay, we're going to see. Viven. So it uses this verb Viven, and Torah Temimah makes a point that some of these midrashim are based on the fact that this particular verb, it's the first time God has used this particular verb in the creation story, because otherwise it's usually bara, which means to create, or yatsar, which means to form. And in this case, it doesn't say God formed the rib. It says he built it. It uses this word vayiven, right? So there seems to be another layer that the Torah is trying to get across here in using this particular verb. So that's why we've got all these, you notice these various interpretations. Amar Rav Chisda, said Rav Chisda, V'amrila b'matnita tane. And there are those who say, b'matnita tane, it is stated in a baraita. So let me just explain a little bit of what's going on here. A baraita, first of all, the word itself means outside. It's an Aramaic word meaning outside baraita. Matnita is the word that they use to mean a baraita. And by outside, they mean outside the Mishnah. In other words, a source that is not included in the Mishnah. Those sources not included in the Mishnah, but which are of Mishnaic, that has come from that period of time of the Mishnah, which is essentially prior to the year 200. The Mishnah was compiled in 200, the year 200. And there are other sources that are found that are contemporaneous with the Mishnah, but are not included in the Mishnah. Those are baraitot, right? Now, Rav Chisda, that term Rav refers to, that's a title given to a teacher from Babylonia, post-Mishnaic. And those rabbis who live post-Mishnaic and those immediately after the close of the Mishnah in several centuries, like 2 or 3 centuries after that, and that are mentioned in the Gemara, but did not live in Mishnaic times, their title, if they're from Babylonia, was Rav. Now, if they lived in, it would have been called Palestine at the time, they would have been called, their title would have been Rabbi. Now, the point is this, though, then it's a little bit confusing, is that rabbis of the Mishnah are also called Rabbi, and of course the Mishnah was compiled in the land of Israel at the time, again called Palestine by the Romans. So we know now, because it says Rav Chisda, that this fellow lived in Babylonia, and it was post the Mishnah. And the point that is being said here is that there are those who say that this source is earlier than Rav Chisda. It's earlier, and by the way, again, just if I didn't mention it already, teachers in the Gemara, teachers of the Talmudic period post Mishnah, are known as Amoraim. That's how they're titled in general. And teachers of the Mishnah are called Tanaim. Tanaim. And there are Palestinian Amoraim who have the title of Rabbi, and of course the Babylonian Amoraim whose title is Rav. Okay, so this is saying that the source would be Amoraic, But there are those who say it's actually an earlier source. That's so I just gave you a mouthful to explain what this is really telling us. So there are those who claim that this is actually an earlier source, what we're going to teach. You might well ask, what difference does it make? What difference does it make? Well, this is something I have not explained to this point, but there is a principle of halacha, of Jewish law, that the more authoritative an item is, means the closer it is to Sinai. In other words, if a law can be dated earlier than another law, then and it's closer then to Sinai, it is considered more authoritative. So an Amora cannot teach something that is in direct contradiction to something that a Tana has taught. They can't do that. Okay, you can't contradict them. Now, it still leaves a lot of room because there's always interpretation. But assuming it has not been stated in an earlier period, it cannot contradict it. Okay, cannot be contradictory. However, the halacha follows the rulings of the latest authorities. In other words, those authorities that give rulings that are the last to be given, that is what the halacha follows. So, for example, even though the Shulchan Aruch per se, which is understood as the codification of Jewish law, and sounds pretty much like a law book, although the question is whether or not it was intended as a law book. Nevertheless, there are subsequent interpretations and commentaries on these laws that actually would give you a closer approximation to where Jewish law is. And in fact, there is an incredible work called the Mishnah Brura that was written by the Chafetz Chaim, and which goes, it's just only on that part of the Shulchan Aruch. There are actually four major volumes, you might say, of the Shulchan Aruch, or areas of law. And this particular book, Mishnah Brura, is only on the first one, Orech Chaim, which is basically describes the daily routines of a Jew and the laws that Jew has to follow. So it has to do with daily practices, it has to do with prayer, it has to do with putting on tefillin, it has to do with keeping the Shabbat and the festivals. That's what Orech Chaim deals with. The next volume, Yoreh Deah, has to do with other areas that generally are not under the auspices of the average Jew. So, for example, laws of shchita, of how animals are to be slaughtered, those particular laws of kashrut, generally they would be in there. And there are also other kinds of laws. So, without wanting to take this any further, there is just this Mishnah Brura is considered pretty authoritative right now. You don't use the Shulchan Aruch as your authority to actually legislate Jewish law. And of course, there's just tons and tons of material that is even being written today by scholars based on this material. Okay, all this coming out of these 6 words or 7 words here. So this is the actual commentary now. Having said all of that, my dichtiv, what does it mean where it states in the Torah, Vayiven Hashem et Hatzela, that Hashem built the tzela, right? The rib, however you want to translate the tzela. We've had some interesting interpretations of that word too. Melamed, that it teaches, Shebina'ah HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'chava Ka'otzar, that he constructed, that the Holy One, blessed be he, constructed Chava, Eve, like a storehouse. Ma otzar katzar milamala, just as a storehouse is narrower above, v'rachav milamata, and wider on the bottom, in order kedei lekabel et haperot, in order to be able to store safely the fruit, right? So that, because obviously the lower down, the weight there displaced, or weight there is far greater than the weight at the top. And so it's built in this sort of shape where it's wider at the bottom and narrower at the top. Afishak tzara milamala, so a woman is constructed to be narrower at the top, v'rechava milamata, and broader on the bottom, kedei lekabel et havlad, in order to be able to carry the fetus, to carry the embryo. Before I go on, does anybody want to comment about that? I don't think this is supposed to be insulting or putting down in the least. I think it's simply saying that a woman is built in that way to be able to do that, or most women are. So let's
Which
take yeah.
which rabbi is right on how a man and woman were formed? Some of them say they were formed by twins. I mean, and then some say they were formed by a rib. I don't know which rabbi is right.
Well, let's put it this way. This is literature. This isn't law that we're discussing on that particular level. And I think there are lessons to be learned from both opinions. Okay?
Okay.
So you can choose which one you like more, and it's not a question necessarily of right and wrong. Okay? Yes, Alex.
It sounds like you mentioned something about they put a rib in God put a rib in specifically for that. So obviously it was not just that he took the rib from Adam, but I thought you alluded to the fact that that was pre-planned.
Yes, that's I don't know that I stated it quite like that, Alex, but we did have a commentary that said that God took that Adam had this like tailbone, right? That was the commentary that gave the impression that you have, which is that Adam was created with this extra sort of tailbone, and God removed it and built Eve from that. So, and that was the idea that Adam had not lost anything. Okay. Although there is a beautiful, beautiful midrash where I don't know if it was a Roman matron who said to a rabbi, I don't know if it was Yossi ben Chalafta. I'm doing this from memory. I don't remember. I guess they used to have discussions, and she said to him, "Oh, wait a second. Yes," she said to him, "Your God is a thief." Okay, why? Because he stole a rib from Adam. So Yossi, I think it was Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta's daughter said, "Let me answer her." And the daughter said to the matron, she said, "Tell me something. If I stole your silver spoon and gave you and left a gold spoon in its place, how upset would you be about that?" So God took a bone from Adam, and here he gave him Eve. What kind of thief is that? And of course, I believe that in the text itself, the woman says something, the matron says, "Gosh, I'd like a lot of thieves to be like that. They can steal a lot of stuff from me if that's the way they're stealing." So anyway. All right. I don't think it's going to be quoted here, but that I recollect anyway. All right, let's take a look what he says here. V'nir'eh, it appears, ta'afopi de'eno merumaz shehabinyan hu ka'otzar. He says, you know something? Where does it say in the text? It doesn't state explicitly or even suggest. There's not even a suggestion in the text that this binyan, right? This bana, you see the verb, right? Was like a storehouse. Doesn't even suggest it. V'yesh lomar. So you could say, kebinyan bayit, right? You could say it just like a house. That's all binyan, just means construction. So God created woman like a house, right? However, midechazina, because we see al pi ha'emet, that in fact, okay, binyan guf ha'isha, that the construction of a woman, who kebinyan otzar, it actually does resemble a storehouse, kamo shetzier, just as was described. Lachein amar ka'otzar. That's why Rav Chisda says like a storehouse. He's simply mentioning the fact of the matter. Yit uvetam hadiyok bichlal lashon vayiven, and it all comes up, and right, and for the reason that he is making a special note, right, taking special note in general of the language Vayiven, right? He says, Ien mashakadov. So Torah Temimah is saying, look at what we wrote, La'el above, Ot Mem He, in note 45. And that's where he talks about the fact that it's Vayiven for the first time, and not, and it's not Bara and Yatzar, etc. Okay, so onwards, Vayiven, another Vayiven, right? They're having a party over this. Amar Rav Chisda, again, this is the same guy. Notice Rav Chisda. My dichtiv vayiven Hashem and Asel. So he's going over the same thing, and Torah Temimah is going to mark that and point something out. Okay, so why does it write? Why does it state God built, right, the tzela? Melamed, this teaches Shenatan HaKadosh Baruch Hu Bina Yetera. It teaches that the Holy One, blessed be He, gave an additional layer of understanding. There's the Bina, right? The Bana, Vayiven, same root, okay. Or Bun, maybe a different root, but yeah, it's a different root. But it's still, in these forms, it's very similar. Be'isha, he gave an added measure of understanding to a woman, Yoter mi be'ish, more than to a man. And this is from Tractate Nida. So that's a new interpretation. So we've got Rav Chisda mentioning two different things, very different things. Let's take a look. Okay. Here we are. Mem Chet. And let's see, is that where we are? Or are, let's see. Oh, yeah. Right. There it is. Memchet. Gam hu medayek lashon vayiven, and he too, he's taking note, right? He's taking special note of this language of the expression vayiven. Kamosha katavnu la'el, just as we wrote above, la'el ot mem he, in note 45. Ye'uyan sham. Umevu'ar b'gamara, and it's explained, clarified in the Gemara, Khan, in this particular reference, She'amar Rav Chisda came b'ta'amei de Rabbi, that Rav Chisda actually was saying this according to the interpretation of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. V'hainu de Rabbi Darish Kain. And in fact, it was Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi who interpreted this particular interpretation. V'tzarich lomar, so we can say, or we have to say, Dahu batzmo lo darish kain, that Rav Chisda he didn't himself, he was simply quoting his rabbi, not his rabbi, but Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi was the compiler of the Mishnah. He was head of the community. He's referred to as Rabbi or Rabbeinu HaKadosh, and as like sort of the rabbi. He doesn't need his name afterwards. It's understood as such because of the level of importance that he had. And I love to give an example that for stamp collectors earlier on, if you had a stamp from England, it didn't say United Kingdom, it didn't say Britain, it didn't have any name on it whatsoever, because apparently stamps were invented. The whole concept of postage stamps was invented in England, so they just didn't put their name on it. At any rate, similar kind of idea. So anyway, Rav Chisda doesn't himself, but he doesn't hold on to this particular interpretation. He is simply quoting a teacher. Because we see right in front of us in the previous drash, in the previous interpretation, Darish Vayiven b'yinacher, he explains the word Vayiven in a whole different kind of way, right? But there's a possibility, mikan raya, this you could take as a proof, lemasha katuv b'sefer be'er sheva, to what is written in the book Be'er Sheva, on the tractate Sota, etc., Detrei Rav Chisda Have, that there were just simply two different rabbis. They both went by Rav Chisda. So the first Rav Chisda said that, and the second Rav Chisda said this. Going on. Ve'inyan habina hayetera, And this issue of a greater level of understanding, l'choora lefi pashtut halashon, okay, according to the plain meaning of the language, of this terminology, heve hakavana, has to do. In other words, what do we mean actually when we talk about an additional layer of understanding? That's what he's getting into. Okay, heve hakavana, the intention is the kamut habina, with the amount of understanding, sheyesh ba, sorry, habina. In other words, the level of understanding or the amount of understanding. Kama means how much, how much. Sheyesh ba ba'alat habina b'midah yitera mibaish, that she has with this quality of understanding of that compared to the amount of understanding that a man has. I guess, I don't know, sometimes maybe it's referred to as feminine intuition. I don't know. But at some level of understanding, I will tell you that I am living proof of that when I think of things that my wife has said to me and explained to me, which I didn't get at the time. Okay. Aval lefi de mashma me'inyan hasugya. He says, but if you actually look at the implications of the subject matter in the sugya refers to the discussion in the Talmud, this Talmudic discussion. Heve hakavana gam le'inyan kadmut hazman. You could say that the intention of this bina yetera has to do also with timing, meaning how early, the relative layer of understanding that a girl has before a boy, that the level of maturity, generally, that girls mature earlier than boys do. Klomar, that is to say, shebe'isha, that with regards to a woman, ba kishron habina, that Kishron sometimes is translated as talent, but let's call it the ability of understanding. Kodem bisman comes earlier in time, me'asher be'ish, than in a man. Ki mevi drasha zo, because this drush that we just read, this one about Vayiven, meaning layer of understanding, this is brought le'inyan nedarim. It is discussed with regards to vows. Shahatinoket bat yudbet shana v'yom echad, because a young girl who is 12 years and a day, shenadra, that made a vow, that if a girl that age makes a vow, nidareha kayamim, those vows are considered established. They're considered legitimate vows. Uvetinok ein nidarav kayamim, but with regards to a little boy, ein nidarav kayamim, his vows are not considered established. Rak biben yud gimel shana v'yom echad, except from 13 years and 1 day. That is essentially a rule of thumb, I can tell you, because in the Gemara itself, when it discusses how you judge the maturity of a child, there is a lot more detail regarding various signs of maturity that are discussed. However, the age is considered a good sort of basis on which to make a generalization. Okay. The omnam, right? However, imnach kor achar tam uviur hadavar. If we do further research, if we dig into the reason and the explanation of this matter, it appears ki shnei inyanim emet, that in fact both these factors, right, both the level of maturity and the level of understanding, are both applicable. They're both the truth. V'hainu, and that is to say, deyesh ba kishron habina b'midah yitera me'asher be'ish, and that is the fact that she has this ability of understanding on a higher level or a higher amount than a man. V'gam mekademet hi lehavi kisharon zeh, and also she develops this earlier than a male. V'yitba'er al pima shekatav Rashi, and it becomes clear according to what Rashi wrote, B'Ktubot Nun Aleph, in the tractate Ketubot 50a, the Tam Hadavar, regarding the reason for this, Shahatinok Mitchanech B'Ta'anit, okay, that this is the reason why a child is trained regarding fasting, Bishnat Hayud Gimel, in his 13th year, V'Atinoket Bishnat Hayud Bet, and a young girl is trained at the age of 12. Mishum dehatinoket memaheret lahavi koach, because a little girl, right, is quicker to be strength. Ya'an she'ena. Okay, this is interesting, that she actually develops strength quicker. She'ena mateshet kocha. Why? Because she doesn't drain her strength. Talmud Torah, in studying Torah, because at least back in those days, women were not obligated to study Torah, and men were. And they was and it was started very early, and they used to spend very long hours of study, quite possibly from dawn till dusk. They were trained in this particular way, and the little boys were trained. And what Rashi is saying, what he's saying is Rashi is saying that the reason for this is that the little boy has to study Torah for such a long time. I will tell you that is raising some questions for me, because you would think that having studied Torah, he would actually gain wisdom in that process. But I don't think that that's where they're coming from on this one. They're coming more in terms of just simply wearying himself, right? Excuse me, one second. Okay. Ad kan lashono. End of quote from Rashi. V'hakavana, and the intention is, ki b'hitchazek kochot haguf, that when we're talking about the body, right, the physical strength of the body, mitchazim gam kochot hanefesh, that along with this, the strengthening of the body goes along the strengthening of the perhaps nefesh, the individual. I mean, nefesh we know means soul. Do they mean the emotional development? Okay, but we'll have to see. That's something to sort of puzzle a little bit. V'lachen, and for this reason, mekevan shememaheret lahavi koach baguf, and because she is earlier, right? She speeds up the strength of her body. Memaheret lahavi koach gam banefesh. She also speeds up the strength of nefesh. So, I mean, we can do that in the context of taking vows and things like that. Dahainu, that is to say, bina v'sechel. So, okay, he explains what he means by nefesh. That's very helpful. Bina, understanding and sense, common sense. V'gam chazak, v'gam chazakot hein. They are more established, right? They are stronger. Uvazeh tit yashev haitev kushiat hatosafot. He says, in understanding this, if we take this all into account, we can understand better a difficulty that the Tosafot raise. Who are the Tosafot? The Tosafot are Rashi's grandchildren, his grandsons, who were amazing scholars and did what every dutiful grandson does, is to take exception to what their grandpa is saying. And so in the Talmud Bavli, on the same page, on one side you have Rashi's commentary, and on the other side you have the Tosafot, who very often disagree with their grandpa's commentary and provide their own answers to questions that they raise with his. And there are also commentators later on who actually explain why Rashi is right and the commentary and the Tosafot are not correct in their misunderstanding, or however they want to take it. But we absolutely have this whole give and take in the Gemara, which is quite amazing. But the fact that we have both on the same page, right? So, Kushiyat HaTosafot LaRashi. So they raise this objection to Rashi's point of view, Biktubot Sham, in the tractate Ktubot, right there. Shehikshu, because they raise an objection. Lama Piresh Hatam, why does he explain? Why does Rashi explain the reason for this, for the girls developing earlier? Mishum Shemamaheret Lahavi Koach, that is to say that she speeds, she's earlier on to bring her strength. Velo mipnei shechinuch shela kodem le'inyan nedarim, right? So he says, and not, why doesn't Rashi explain that we understand it, we see it, that because Ketubot says that she is trained regarding vows, that showing the fact that the Gemara is saying that the reason we can see why that girls in fact develop maturity earlier is you can see from the law regarding training. Excuse me, not the training, but the fact that regarding vows, her vows are considered valid at the year of 12 years and a day, and a boy's vows only at 13 and a day, kamosha katavnu, as we wrote. Ulafima shebe'arnu divrei Rashi me'irim. But according to what we just explained, Rashi's explanation is now clear. It is helpful. Gufa, that this in itself, that is to say, klomar, that is, tam kidmut hachinuch, right? That the reason for this training, etc., who mitam shipiresh Rashi, is for the very reason that Rashi said, mipnei hitchazkut kocha. That is because she becomes stronger earlier, right? She is stronger. Arnu, and just according to how we explained, ki behitchazek kochot haguf, that just as the body becomes stronger, mitchazeket gam kochot hanefesh. So the abilities, the properties of the nefesh, that is understanding and sense, go along with it. And for that reason, she is trained with regards to vows earlier. Vedok, and he's comfortable. QED. He hasn't finished. Okay, but we are going to have to finish because we're out of time. So I'm going to pop this in here, and we'll know where to continue next time we meet. Okay. Any thoughts, any comments, any reflections before I turn this off? I see that Harlan is trying to unmute. Yes, Harlan.
Oh, well, I was wondering, why can't we be equal to women? I don't understand. Tosafot probably says we're equal, and Rashi says we're not. Why can't we be equal? I mean, that destroys my male ego.
Your male ego then apparently is extremely fragile. I don't feel bad about this. I mean, he's simply describing what they were observing in those times. By the way, it's the issue that the difficulty that Tosafot have to do with Rashi going into the explanation that the reason why has to do with Talmud Torah. That because the boys are using up all their energy studying Torah, and that's why they develop only a year. And the Tosafot is saying, why does Rashi have to go searching after that reason when the reason is given right there in the Gemara? That's Tosafot's problem, right? So not that they're saying that men and women are equal in terms of the development, just that Rashi's need to find an explanation seems strange to them. But no, I mean, it is what it is. I don't think it's you know, we haven't finished this commentary, okay? And there's more that he's going to have to say about it. So I'm going to keep you in suspense until our next lesson on this subject.
Okay.
With that, I'm going to stop the recording.